When you mention British corporate presence in India, history does not exactly paint a picture of philanthropy. For centuries, the shadow of the East India Company has served as the ultimate cautionary tale of corporate overreach. This was an enterprise that did not just do business in a country, but entirely swallowed it. They arrived seeking spices and textiles, and eventually extracted wealth on a scale that fundamentally altered the global economy, leaving behind a legacy of colonization, taxation, and monopoly. So, if I told you that one of the most beloved, trusted, and deeply ingrained institutions in rural India today is a subsidiary of a British multinational, you would be entirely forgiven for raising an eyebrow. We are talking about a company that operates in a nation fiercely protective of its domestic markets, a nation that remembers its history. Yet, this corporation is not viewed as a foreign invader. In millions of Indian households, it is seen as a local benefactor. It is an entity that, quite literally, put money into the hands of impoverished women and fundamentally changed the hygiene habits of an entire subcontinent. This is the story of Hindustan Unilever and a highly calculated, immensely risky gamble called Project Shakti. It is a story about the intersection of ruthless market capitalism and genuine social engineering. And it forces us to ask a rather uncomfortable question. Can a massive British conglomerate actually be the good guy? Or is this just the most successful public relations coup in modern corporate history? To understand the sheer improbability of this success, we have to rewind to 1947. India had just awoken to life and freedom, finally shedding the British Empire after decades of struggle. Naturally, the political and social mood was not exactly hospitable to Western corporations. The new nation was built on the ideals of self-reliance. Over the next few decades, the Indian government adopted strict protectionist policies, heavily leaning towards a socialist economic model. The message to foreign businesses was unequivocal: adapt to our rules, hand over your equity to domestic partners, or get out. The peak of this corporate hostility came in the late 1970s. In 1977, the government enforced the draconian Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. Giants of American capitalism, like Coca-Cola and IBM, were handed an ultimatum regarding their ownership structures. Famously, they packed their bags and left the country rather than comply. The corporate exodus was viewed as a triumph of national sovereignty, yet Unilever stayed. Why did they survive when so many others fell? Because they did something highly unusual for a British firm at the time. They let go of the steering wheel. Long before the government mandates forced their hand, the company had begun a quiet process of deep integration. They appointed Prakash Tandon as the first Indian chairman of Hindustan Unilever. Under his leadership, they systematically Indianized their board of directors, their product lines, and their entire corporate ethos. They stopped acting like an outpost of the British Empire and started acting like an Indian company that just happened to have foreign shareholders. But survival in the 20th century did not guarantee dominance in the 21st. By the late 1990s, Hindustan Unilever faced a profound crisis. It had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with geography. The urban markets, cities like Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore, were becoming saturated. Every middle-class household already had their soaps, their shampoos, and their laundry detergents. If the company wanted to maintain its aggressive growth, they had to look beyond the city limits. They had to look at rural India. We are not talking about a few quaint villages on the outskirts of towns. We are talking about an expanse of over 600,000 villages, home to hundreds of millions of people. It was an ocean of potential consumers, but an ocean that was seemingly impossible to navigate. Now, selling soap in London or Mumbai is a matter of marketing. You buy billboard space, you run television adverts, and you stock the shelves of local supermarkets. Selling soap in a remote village in the state of Bihar in the year 1999 was a logistical nightmare. There were no paved roads. There were no established distribution networks. There was absolutely no advertising infrastructure. Traditional supply chains physically broke down at what logistics experts call the last mile. Regional distributors flatly refused to send their trucks down muddy, unpaved terrain that was impassable during the monsoon season, especially when the final destination was a tiny hamlet where they might sell a grand total of 5 bottles of shampoo in an entire week. The sheer cost of fuel, vehicle maintenance, and time required to reach these consumers was vastly higher than any profit the company could ever hope to make. Hindustan Unilever had hit a brick wall. They needed a distribution network that required zero corporate infrastructure. They needed a system that demanded zero upfront capital investment from the company itself. And they needed a delivery mechanism that could navigate physical and cultural terrain that terrified traditional delivery truck drivers. They needed a miracle. Or, as it turned out, they needed the women of rural India. In the year 2000, the company officially launched Project Shakti. The name translates to power or strength in Sanskrit, and it was about to live up to its name in ways the executives in London could scarcely have imagined. The premise was alarmingly simple, yet heavily controversial within corporate circles at the time. Instead of paying middlemen, wholesalers, and fleet drivers to transport goods, the company would bypass the traditional supply chain entirely. They would identify impoverished women in remote villages, facilitate microloans so these women could buy a small initial stock of products and turn them into direct-to-consumer micro-entrepreneurs. From a comfortable, climate-controlled office overlooking the River Thames in London, this sounds like a lovely, heartwarming idea. It sounds like a brilliant bit of corporate social responsibility to highlight in an annual shareholder report. But on the ground in rural India, the risks were absolutely staggering. Firstly, the company was dealing with women who had, in many cases, never handled money independently in their entire lives. Indian rural society at the turn of the millennium was deeply patriarchal. The public sphere, the markets, and all financial transactions were almost exclusively the domain of men. For a woman to step out of her house, walk through the village, and actively sell commercial products to neighbors and strangers was culturally taboo. It went against centuries of ingrained social norms. Secondly, there was the enormous credit risk. Hindustan Unilever was essentially relying on the poorest demographic in the country to handle inventory, manage cash flow, and turn a profit. Company archives and interviews with former executives suggest that early internal reactions were highly skeptical. Many traditional business managers viewed it not as a viable commercial strategy, but as a bleeding heart charity project that would inevitably hemorrhage money. They argued that you cannot build a reliable corporate distribution network on the backs of untrained, uneducated rural housewives. To make this ambitious scheme work, the company knew they could not just drop off cardboard boxes of Lifebuoy soap and wish the women good luck. They had to build an ecosystem from scratch. They partnered with local non-governmental organizations and rural microcredit banks to facilitate the small loans needed to start. More importantly, they created a dedicated team of rural sales managers. These were ambitious young executives who were forced out of their air-conditioned offices and sent deep into the countryside. Their job was to sit on woven mats in village huts and train these women now officially known as Shakti Ammas, or Shakti mothers, in the fundamentals of business. They taught them basic bookkeeping, inventory management, and sales techniques. This was not just a corporate sales pitch, it was a crash course in free market capitalism, delivered to women who had previously been entirely excluded from the economy. And it was about to unlock a market that most Western corporations had not even realized existed. Let's look at what actually happened on the ground through a composite example, an illustrative story built from thousands of identical accounts from that era. We will call our representative entrepreneur Sunita. Before the project arrived, Sunita's household income was heavily dependent on seasonal agriculture. It was unpredictable, vulnerable to droughts or floods, and barely enough to survive on. When she was selected to become a Shakti Amma, she took a microloan of roughly 10 to 15 pounds, which equated to about 1,000 rupees. She used this capital to buy her very first stock of goods. Sunita did not have a shop with a sign and a cash register. Her shop was a woven bag. She physically walked from door to door, traversing the dusty paths of her village and neighboring settlements. Because Sunita was a familiar face, a mother, and a member of the community, she possessed an asset that a massive multinational corporation could never buy: intrinsic trust. When a faceless television advert tells a rural farmer to buy a specific brand of soap, it is easily ignored. But when Sunita sat down with a fellow mother and explained that washing her children's hands with Lifebuoy soap could prevent the dysentery and cholera that frequently swept through the village, the mother listened. This is the hidden, brilliant genius of Project Shakti. It was not merely a logistics and distribution solution. It was a peer-to-peer marketing network operating long before the internet or social media ever reached these remote areas. Sunita was an influencer before the term even existed. Furthermore, this strategy relied heavily on another major corporate innovation, the sachet revolution. You cannot sell a large, expensive bottle of premium shampoo to a family surviving on less than $2 a day. So, the company drastically altered its packaging. They placed small, single-use portions of shampoo, tea, toothpaste, and laundry powder into tiny plastic sachets that cost a fraction of a penny. Sunita was not selling bulk items. She was selling micro-products tailored perfectly to the daily cash flow of a rural farm worker. The results of this grand experiment were staggering. Women who had lived their entire lives with zero financial independence were suddenly generating reliable profits. In the early years, a dedicated Shakti Amma could earn between 700 to 1,000 rupees a month. While this sounds like a pittance in Western terms, in a rural Indian village at the time, it was a significant sum that often doubled a household's total disposable income. But the most profound change was not financial. It was social. The money shifted the deeply entrenched power dynamics within the home. Sunita was no longer just a dependent wife or a silent mother. She was a business owner. She paid for her children's school fees. She bought medicine when the family was ill. Because she was bringing cash into the home, she suddenly had a voice in household decisions. The men in the village, initially resistant and skeptical of women wandering around selling goods, were quietly silenced by the undeniable economic benefit. Sunita commanded a new, unprecedented level of respect. And what did the British conglomerate get out of this massive social experiment? They achieved total, unassailable market dominance. By actively targeting what economists refer to as the bottom of the pyramid, Hindustan Unilever created a level of brand loyalty that competitors found almost impossible to dislodge. By the time rival companies figured out how to penetrate the rural markets, entire generations of villagers had already grown up trusting the products brought to their door by their local Shakti Amma. By the year 2010, Project Shakti had grown from a tentative pilot scheme into an unstoppable commercial juggernaut. It boasted an army of over 45,000 rural female entrepreneurs, actively covering more than 100,000 previously unreachable villages. Today, that number is reported to have swelled to over 160,000 women. Hindustan Unilever had essentially built a private army. It was an army of women who were fiercely loyal to the company, not out of blind corporate devotion, but because the company had handed them the keys to their own economic agency. The legacy of Project Shakti extends far beyond the balance sheets of Unilever. It became a mandatory case study in institutions like the Harvard Business School. It heavily influenced the work of the late management guru C.K. Prahalad, providing the empirical foundation for his groundbreaking book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. It proved, on a massive scale, that doing genuine social good and generating a ruthless, highly efficient corporate profit are not necessarily mutually exclusive concepts, but a story this large invites a moment of critical reflection. We must look at this without the rose-tinted glasses of corporate public relations. For centuries, British wealth in India was extracted through coercion, land taxes, and forced monopolies. The relationship was inherently parasitic. The colony was drained to enrich the metropole. Hindustan Unilever arguably flipped that historical script. They did not extract existing wealth. They actively stimulated new microeconomies. They provided credit, training, and opportunity. Yet, let us not be entirely naive. This was never an act of pure, altruistic charity. It was a fiercely calculated, ruthlessly efficient business strategy specifically designed to conquer the absolute last untouched commercial frontier in a country of over 1 billion people. We must also look at what, exactly, these women were selling. They sold hygiene, yes. The distribution of cheap soap undeniably saved lives and improved public health. But they also sold fairness creams. For decades, Hindustan Unilever's flagship cosmetic product in these rural markets was Fair and Lovely, a product that has faced intense, justified scrutiny for perpetuating deeply harmful colorism and reinforcing toxic beauty standards rooted in caste and colonial prejudices across Indian society. The company profited immensely from making marginalized women feel insecure about their natural skin tone, using the very same Shakti network to distribute those insecurities door to door. The corporate halo is never entirely spotless. Ethical capitalism is rarely as clean as a freshly washed bar of soap. Yet, despite the complex moral calculus of selling fairness creams alongside life-saving hygiene products, the fundamental truth on the ground remains unchanged. When you ask rural Indian families about Hindustan Unilever today, they do not see a British colonial hangover. They do not see the ghost of the East India Company. They see the company that gave their mother her first ever paying job. They see the tiny sachets of soap that kept their children healthy during the monsoon season, when there were no clinics nearby. They see a corporation that looked at the poorest, most inaccessible villages on Earth and saw value, potential, and partnership, rather than just cheap labor or resources to be plundered. In the complex, often dark, and deeply fraught history of British corporate ventures overseas, Project Shakti stands out as a bizarre, brilliant, and contradictory anomaly. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the absolute most effective way for a massive, profit-driven corporation to serve its wealthy shareholders in London is to actually, genuinely serve the poorest people it is selling to. Thanks for watching. If you found this deep dive into corporate history and social engineering fascinating, let us know in the comments. Is Project Shakti the ultimate, shining model for ethical capitalism in the developing world, or is it just a clever, highly efficient exploitation of an untapped market? Let us know what you think, and do not forget to subscribe for more investigations into the hidden stories behind the brands we use every day.